So what's Baylor think of all this Walker White stuff?
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen or second listen every day. This is a happy hour edition of the show, and it features a conversation that we had with Cam Stewart, host of Locked On Baylor, of course, all about their new quarterback, former Auburn quarterback, Walker White.
Here on Locked On Baylor, I have interviewed former coaches, radio hosts, former players, all people around the sports world. I have never interviewed my boss.
Oh, yeah, that's wow. How about that? Have we never done a show together? I guess we
never done one. Never done. Is it fair to call it an interview, though? This is a crossover. I'm not going to call it an interview anymore.
It doesn't feel like an interview. It feels like a chat between buddies about Walker White, former Auburn quarterback, now with the Baylor Bears.
Yes, that is Zach Blackerby of Locked On Auburn. I'm Cam Stewart, Locked On Baylor. Let's talk about Walker White. It was a huge commitment for the Bears over the weekend, right as the transfer portal window was closing. And it seems weird for people outside of Baylor to see, a former four-star guy, top 3 dual threat quarterback recruit in the nation a couple years ago, coming into a program that has an established starter, that has a guy who is going to be back next year and going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 next year. So, Zach, I want to get your reaction to that of, hey, here's a guy who seems to be running from the grind a little bit at Auburn, and now he's going to come and sit behind another established starter at Baylor.
Yeah, and I don't know if he's running from the grind. I definitely have seen that narrative from the Auburn side of this.
I've seen a lot of it,
yeah, and I get it, but I don't think it's entirely accurate. So let's add context to this. This is
why we
guy,
bring you here.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's context this thing up. I think the assumption for Walker and a lot of Auburn fans going into this transfer portal window was, okay, Auburn's going to go out to the portal. They're going to get a guy with 1 year left of eligibility and say, okay, here's how we go with 2025. And then after that, it's going to be a competition between Walker White, former 4-star, and then Deuce Knight, who's a true freshman now, former 5-star. And let's just see what happens. Well, they bring in Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma, and he's a little bit younger and has more eligibility than what a lot of people were expecting going into this transfer portal window. So if you're Walker, I don't know if it entirely makes sense for this, but also just my understanding of the quarterback room as a whole, and I think it starts with Peyton Thorne, who was Auburn starter a year ago, to Holden Geriner, who transferred, to Hank Brown, who transferred, and obviously to Walker, who transferred. I don't think the quarterbacks were particularly happy with everything that went on. I think you could see that frustration kind of swell up on the sidelines from time to time last year. How much of that was scheme? How much of that was just not, scoring as many points as you're supposed to? I don't know. But overall communication seems to be questioned, from Auburn players. And so we'll see exactly what happens with that moving forward. But as far as the context, the timing doesn't make sense. And so he goes to Baylor, where it seems like there's a clear starter for this year. He's got 1 year left, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And then maybe he gets to compete for the job, which is kind of what he thought he was going to do at Auburn. So it makes sense. It makes sense why he picked Baylor.
Yeah, so this is, a team that had a hat on the table at Little Rock Christian when he was making his decision. Yeah. And it is interesting in terms of, let's put some more context into this. He enters into the portal, the beginning of the portal period, but after Jackson Arnold commits to Auburn. So there's kind of writing on the wall there, and he goes up until the very end of the portal. And so and I'm sure he had options. He's not one of those guys who posted every offer that he had, but I'm sure there was some interest there. And right away, we heard about an offer from Baylor and a visit to Baylor, and he weighs it all. And here he is coming to Baylor. And I mentioned at the beginning of this, running from the grind. There is a difference between that and a log jam. We have to appreciate that those are two different things.
Sure.
And you put out a tweet the other day about hey, Auburn fans, how do we feel about this? How do we feel about the Walker White commitment? It got a lot of responses. What was the prevailing thought, or what is the prevailing thought and emotions around Walker White leaving and committing to Auburn or Baylor? Oof.
Yeah. I think I think it's split. I think a lot of folks are really excited about Jackson Arnold, and then presumably Deuce Knight being the guy after him in the future. And I think there are some folks that think Walker White, translates into this superstar quarterback, which he has the traits, and we can kind of go over what his traits are in a second. But I would say it's split. And look, this Auburn fan base, they've gone through some rough seasons over the last few years. And this isn't a fan base that's used to being down for this long. Auburn football is up and down over the last, however, but they haven't been down this long. In fact, normally when they're down, they compete for a national championship a year or two later. It's kind of a fascinating thing. It feels like we're so far from that right now, just as far as what the last 3 seasons have done. And they've got some more guys coming in, but it's just when you're losing, Cam, you want to point to everything and say like everything is so bad, which it's not, right? I think Auburn's close, but like Walker wasn't going to help you this year anyway. Like I don't think Walker White is ready to compete at the SEC level or the Big 12 level this year, but I do think he has traits where he could be developed and be a really, really solid quarterback.
I was thinking you were about to go with, he's not ready to compete in the SEC, but you guys out there, he maybe he gets a shot, but I
respect the Big 12 more than the average SEC person. I'll say that.
And it's not because Locked On Big 12 does such good numbers. Ball.
Man, if anything, Drake Toll makes me like the Big 12 less, if I'm being honest.
I think that's a shared sentiment, man, amongst a lot of people. Check out Locked On Big 12 every day, by the way. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Right. I do want to talk about, you mentioned, all right, so we know how the fans feel about what's his name? Walker White. There we go.
Nice.
And it goes both ways. They could feel divided on Walker White. I think Walker White feels divided on Auburn right now. And he does an interview with Pete Thamel about this commitment to Baylor. And he says, I'm excited to work with Coach Spavital in this Baylor offense. It feels like there's more of a plan at place at quarterback. I'm paraphrasing a little bit there. Was that a shot at Hugh Freeze on the way out the door?
I got to hear.
Please.
I'm also excited. There's a clear plan for quarterback development, which is a buzzword on the Auburn side of things, because it's like, how often are people getting developed here at Auburn? They want to cast blame on Hugh Freeze. I'm like, I don't know if he's been here long enough to fully know that. And I'll probably jump into that on Locked On Auburn if you want to kind of hear more of that discussion. But this got people going. And I guess, once again, I think the Auburn fan base was split on how they reacted to this. I think one side was like, well, is he wrong? And the other was like, okay, this guy's been all Auburn since the day he committed. Everybody thought he was going to commit to Clemson. He ended up committing to Auburn. It was this big deal. And he's been all Auburn, been a big recruiter, a huge ambassador for the program. And so many folks are like, oh, okay, he's taking a shot out the door. Like, why would he burn this bridge or whatever? I don't think it was intentional. It sounds like he was asked for a quote, and he was just answering a few questions by Thamel, and Thamel doing what Thamel does. He knew what he was doing. Thamel knew what he was doing. I don't know if Walker knew what he was doing, because Walker is so savvy. He's so savvy. And that's kind of why I'm like, well, why would he say that? Because he's so good with media. He did a lot of interviews when he was a recruit because he knew he could send his message out to, hey, come play with me. He was so vocal about kind of being the face of that 2024 class. And a lot of the guys wanted to play with him. I think he's part of why Auburn had the best receiver class in 2024 with Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson and Bryce Kane and Malcolm Simmons. Which leads me to kind of ask the question, like, is as savvy as he is and as smart as Walker is, like, there's no way he knew that there wasn't a chance that was going to be grabbed by Thamel and put out there. So I don't fully know how I feel about it, but I know Walker, and I know he loves Auburn. And so, like, I have a hard time seeing him kind of talking smack and shooting shots that direction. But I don't know. It's kind of hard to argue right now.
But Thamel knew what he was doing.
He's good at it. I know a lot of people don't like him, but he's good at what he does.
He's great, man. And I know that's been, kind of a contention with Auburn fans of this quarterback. And I've got people in my comments now saying they're never developing a quarterback again. They're just going to go in the portal and go in the portal. And who knows? That remains to be seen. So let's see what Baylor's getting, what Auburn is losing next.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Rocket Money. Rocket Money can help you find any subscriptions you forgot about, or even some that you were paying for twice. It's happened to me in the past. Other folks that have come on the show have endorsed Rocket Money. It's so easy to use. There's so many different subscriptions and streaming services. And look, it'll pull them all up for you once you sign up. And you can do that over at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. And you can make the decision with either yourself or with your loved ones, whoever you share a bank account with, and say, hey, like, are we actually even using this? Is this worth the $9.99 a month? In most cases, you're going to be able to find some that definitely aren't. Or, oh my goodness, I thought I canceled this months ago. And odds are you didn't. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon.
Zach Blackerby, Locked On Auburn podcast, and this Locked On Baylor, Locked On Auburn crossover. Zach, what have we won? What is Baylor getting with Walker White? I know there's going to be plenty of Auburn fans who are going to say he ain't anything going out the door, but there's a reason why he was such a highly touted prospect and why you said, kind of the face of that recruiting class for Auburn.
Yeah, I think Walker could be a really good player. The only con for Walker White scouting report to me is like, I just don't think he's ready for 2025. He wasn't ready last year. They kind of eased him in. They put him in garbage time at one of those non-conference games late in the year. I don't think he's ready to compete or be a starter this year. But you look at the traits, and it's all stuff that projects well to be, a solid college quarterback in the future. He's big, he's tall, he's strong, he's athletic, he's really good with his feet. He's got an arm that can throw it a mile. And it seems like his accuracy from when we saw him in the spring versus the little bit that we saw him in the fall seemed like he took a step forward. His teammates love him. Sounds like he earned some respect by the way he ran scout team this past year. I think there's a lot to like about Walker. We did hear a lot in the spring that like he was the word that the coaching staff used was like swimming, which is like, I guess a lot of information was thrown at him and he was like taking him a little bit of time to adjust. Yeah. I never heard that term that way. I did a segment on that back in the spring, but it does seem like the game slowed down a little bit for him. But you got to think, this is a guy who played private school ball in Arkansas and he goes straight into the SEC. Like there is going to be
6A Texas high school football.
It's different. Yeah. That's not the same thing for sure. So it's a pretty big jump. I don't know if you expected him to come in and start, which I know some people did. I don't know why they thought that, but like, I don't know if you're being incredibly fair to yourself or to Walker, but give him a year to where the path to him being the guy is pretty clear a year out. I think that's how like the best way you can develop a quarterback is like, all right, learn everything you can, be a sponge because he's going to ask the right questions. He's going to take all the notes. He's going to be a guy who, absorbs all of this, whatever Baylor throws at him. I think him sitting behind y'all's starter this year makes a ton of sense and give him a chance. Give him a chance to throw him the keys for 2026. I think that's a reasonable timeline.
So from the Auburn perspective, you talked about how it's going to be a battle between he and Deuce Knight, not only for next year, but really kind of the next couple of years of the Auburn program. Is it a better scenario to be in having that scenario that you laid out, or Jackson Arnold, who you've got now, plus Walker White? Which one would Auburn fans like feel better off with?
I think with the addition of Jackson Arnold, and let's assume you get Jackson for 2 years, there's a chance that Jackson's great and he goes to the league after this year. I don't think that's the most likely option. So let's assume we get Jackson Arnold Auburn for 2 years. If that's the case, I think within those 2 years, at some point, Deuce Knight would have hopped Walker White. That's just my gut reaction. And so like Auburn, I think, was thrown off by Walker entering the portal. I think they expected Holden Gerner to enter the portal. I think they expected Hank Brown to enter the portal. The Walker White news, it surprised me. And the timing of it happening shortly after Jackson announcing like It certainly feels like the two were tied. We don't know that. That's purely speculation. But I think if Jackson were to be the guy for 2 years and you had Walker and Deuce competing for the backup spot to be the heir apparent after Jackson Arnold leaves, I think it would have been Deuce Knight at some point hopping Walker. That's just my gut reaction.
Gotcha. So let me then ask you this, because you say Walker's not ready, and thankfully, Baylor's got a starter.
Yeah, the timing makes sense. 100%.
That he can learn under. But Jackson Arnold, we see a guy who played in the SEC for the first time this year. Obviously, OU really mortgaged their future there. They kind of more or less pushed Dylan Gabriel out the door, and he probably going to win a national championship this year. Arnold's a guy who got benched this year on a 6-7 team. Is Jackson Arnold ready for the SEC?
Yeah. I think when you look at the situation that Jackson Arnold was in last year, like Oklahoma, every receiver they had, it seems like they got hurt. I'm pretty sure they asked some of their water boys, like, can you run a route? Can you run a 10-yard in? Just
I got a DM. I got a DM from.
Did you? They
Brent.
asked you. Yeah, they asked you. They checked on your eligibility. Yeah. And same with offensive line. And Oklahoma going into last year was already replacing their entire offensive line already. And I remember being in SEC media days, like, why is no one talking about this? Like, this is important. Like, oh no, they've recruited. I'm like, I don't think it matters. And it didn't. And they had a bunch of injuries on top of it. So, I mean, it's kind of a similar situation to Auburn. It's like, were guys put in situations to succeed? Like, was Jackson Arnold put into a situation to succeed last year? And he wasn't. But then when his number was called in the biggest game of the year outside of Texas, they beat Alabama and they used him as a running back. They just ran him over and over and over and over and over again. So he's got the ability. My question isn't fit, because I think he's got the receivers to throw to. I think Auburn's going to have one of the better receiving cores in the conference. I think their offensive line is top half. Their running backs are fine. Can it work within the scheme? Can it work within Hugh Freeze's RPO scheme? I think that's what it's going to come down to.
Okay, now let me play a little bit of devil's advocate here.
Great.
Because I just kind of laid out why Jackson Arnold might not be ready.
Sure.
And so that's a good, non-biased for the Auburn fans, unbiased perspective. So now I call on you for an unbiased perspective here.
Okay.
I've talked about all the positives of Walker White coming in, basically like grabbing another one of the top quarterbacks in high school football, essentially, with the 4 years of eligibility remaining and how highly rated he was. But he also entered the portal after 1 year at Auburn, and you laid out a scenario where he could have been battling for the starting job next year. Could have been. So is that a red flag to Baylor fans that, hey, you think you've got this great shiny new toy, but he did just leave another place after 1 year?
Maybe. And like, I talk about this all the time.
Flag, maybe.
Maybe. My gut is no. I don't think it's a red flag, and I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything negative about Walker, just because I respect the young man that he is, and he's come on my show, and like I think he's a very well put together guy that you want in your football program. I would have loved for him to compete for quarterback 2 at Auburn this year. They brought in Ashton Daniels. I would have loved for them to compete. I think that would have been a great situation for Walker. He didn't seem interested in that. Was it NIL? Was it fit? Was it personality within the staff? I don't know. But I've heard from several players, Cam, several players within Auburn's program, that communication from the top to offensive players was frustrating. And that could have played a part. That could have played a part in all of this. And maybe he wanted a fresh start. Maybe he wanted to play in a different type of offense, because there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions about Hugh Freeze's offense right now. Do you need a very specific type of quarterback to run it? But also, like, I don't think Walker is very smart. He's a very smart kid. And I think he's very aware. And when you've got a guy that's coming in behind you, who's one of the highest rated players you've ever brought in at the quarterback position, he may be the highest, Deuce Knight. It's like, you can't not play that guy. You just can't. And I don't think it's anything against Walker, but like all the things we just listed about Walker, smart, athletic, got an arm. It's like Deuce is probably better at all of those things. So we'll see. We'll see over time. And I just think over 2 years, I think Deuce would have hopped him.
But we're getting a good dude here.
Yeah, strong Baylor man.
Love to hear that. Love to hear that. Zach Blackerby of the Locked On Auburn podcast. I appreciate you hopping on with us and talking some Walker White, what Baylor's gained, what Auburn has lost. I don't think he will be lining up against the Tigers week 1 next year.
But I do think he'll be lining up against the Tigers in 2026.
You think so? That second go around on the plains, the return.
Wouldn't that be wild? Wouldn't that be incredible?
It makes a ton of sense. Is that week 1 in 26 as well? Do we know?
I don't know if they've announced that or not.
Yeah.
But my gut says yes. I hope so. For
Early,
the sake of
anyway.
the cinema, I hope so.
Oh, that'd
be
gonna
awesome.
be great. We're gonna have
That'd be
some
awesome.
we're gonna have some great crossovers this August, but that next August is gonna be
who wins the trade? Who wins the trade between Auburn and Baylor? We received Jarrett Stidham.
Yep.
You guys receive Walker White. Who wins the trade? Cam Stewart.
I think Baylor's going to win that trade eventually.
Wow.
Walker White is going to take the Baylor Bears to the playoff, and that will be a 1 trade. And here, can I throw one more at you?
Please.
If we're going
to
extend this here, this trade, this great relationship that Baylor and Auburn has had.
Sure.
Davion Mitchell did bring a national championship.
Gosh.
To Baylor.
I forget about
that's a win, man. Hal Presley.
That dude was locked down. What's the name of the defensive coordinator we got from y'all?
Ron Roberts, baby.
Yeah.
This is the Locked On Auburn host. That shows you the staying power that Ron Roberts had at Auburn.
Well, like
Kevin
he had
Steele.
such a successful stint for Kevin Steele. Kevin Steele. He was absolute nails, my guy.
I think you guys won that part of the trade. I would say.
The Davion Mitchell winning a natty. It's kind of hard to argue against that. Jarrett Stidham won an SEC West championship, and if the running back, Kerryon Johnson, hadn't gotten hurt, I think we make the playoff that year. But all right. What a fun relationship between Auburn and Baylor. Good stuff.
It's great. And we both got to watch Jarrett Stidham shine on both levels, rooting for him at both levels.
Yeah. Go Pats. Go Pats. Jarrett Stidham forever, baby. Let's go.
Number 1 pick. It's in our hands. I can't wait. Maybe we'll do a crossover for that. I don't know. Zach, thank you so much. I appreciate it, man. I'm so happy to see what the Bears are getting in Walker White.
Yeah. We'll talk more this summer, I'm sure. Locked on Auburn, Locked on Baylor. Let's get it.
Let's go.